Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Inter-American Dialogue. My name is Michael Camilleri. I direct the Dialogue's Peter D. Bell Rule of Law program. We're thrilled to welcome you all today and thrilled to have a chance to go deep on both a country and an issue that don't tend to get the attention they deserve, Paraguay and government contracting. It's become more and more clear in recent years with everything from Lava Jato in Brazil to Casablanca in Mexico to Odebrecht everywhere, that public contracts are an enormous vulnerability to corruption, whether it is graphed through inflated contract price tags or bribes paid to secure a contract ahead of other bids. Corruption in contracting results in lower quality public services at a higher cost to the taxpayer. So what we want to do today is use this case study to look at this issue that doesn't always get a lot of attention. Paraguay and its fairly ambitious attempts to make public contracts available and accessible online. And to think about the benefits of open contracting, as well as the limitations and the challenges to implementation, as well as how it and other transparency measures fit into a broader accountability matrix. In other words, is Paraguay an example for its neighbors? How well is the process going? What are the lessons that can be learned? And what next steps should be taken? And as we discuss this, I want us to pay attention to how this effort can be useful to some of the countries in the region where the most severe problems exist. We spend, I think, a lot of time talking about how countries like El Salvador and Guatemala can be more like Chile or Uruguay or Costa Rica. Maybe we should be asking how those countries can be more like Paraguay. And so to answer that question, we are extremely fortunate to be joined by two terrific speakers. Leia Jimenez is Minister of Finance of Paraguay. She is the first woman to hold the job. She is the youngest finance minister in Latin America, and I would dare to say one of the best qualified, with a doctorate in economics from Lehigh University just up the road. And George Newman, a good friend, senior manager for communications and engagement at the Open Contracting Partnership, a real expert in this area. So we're thrilled to have them both join us. We'll have a dynamic and open discussion. We'll leave time for your questions. And before inviting them to the stage, it is my great pleasure to introduce the President of the Central Bank of Paraguay, Carlos Fernandez, to deliver opening remarks. President Fernandez, welcome. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Inter-American Dialogue, to Open Contracting for the opportunity to present the case of Paraguay. We always try to highlight some of the macro achievement that we had during recent years, talking about fiscal, talking about monetary, but institutional issues are as important as the other issues as well. While we were quite good at marketing our efforts, addressing all the weakness we used to have in fiscal and monetary policy, we were not that successful in addressing or telling the world about all the efforts we were doing during recent years in order to increase transparency in public practice in Paraguay. But today is a great opportunity to start talking and do the right marketing for what Paraguay has been doing recently. Let me start first with the word corruption, that many people give different definition of that. There is no total agreement on that. And I was reading what the IMF was saying in recent reports. Sorry, I'm reading here because I'm a millennial, so I use this instead of the paper. The IMF definition is the abuse of public office for private gain. But I was thinking, okay, and what about the FIFA scandal? This is not public money involved. It's totally private money involved. So what I want to highlight is the difficulty to define corruption, that everyone have an idea what it is, but it's really difficult to give an academic definition of that. But we know about corruption and the different phases it has. Now, you may think about why a governor of the central bank is talking or is engaged in a conversation regarding corruption, and in this case, open contracting. Let me take again the definition of the IMF, or the definition that always Madame Lagarde gives. And she said that corruption is macro-critical. And it's true. Has many economic and social implications in our countries. It's affecting our macroeconomic functioning through different ways. The first one, and it's very quick, through lower growth rate in our economies. How is done that? Probably with something that is related to contracting or procurement, public procurement. Many times, and the Odebrecht case is a key case on that, that you are actually building the roads that you don't need, or you're building the road with not the highest return. And on top of that, you are paying much more for that road. So it's quite inefficient from the investment point of view. And given that one of the problems in Latin America is the lack of investment, private and public, the few investment that we are doing right now is totally inefficient. So it's very damaging how corruption is affecting the efficiency of our capital investment in Latin America. Now, when we were at the central bank, I started talking about, we were talking about the different challenge that we had. We saw in every single report of the different credit rating agencies that Paraguay was good on the macro part, very good fiscal responsibility law, very good monetary policy with inflation on target, but each and every one of them were highlighting the issue of Paraguay need to strengthen institutions. So given what Madame Lagarde said, macro-critical, and we were aware of that, and also the focus we are giving to the objective of achieving investment grade in the future, we decided that this is something that we have to start working seriously about. It's not enough to have very low fiscal deficit and very low inflation rate in order for Paraguay to become the country that we want to be. So we did a presentation. We were looking, I remember that day that we asked a team at the central bank to work on the transparency index. They start analyzing it, the sources of it. We present a report at the economic team meeting. And then after that, we, by decree, designated a multi-agency work team in order to work on measures to increase our transparency index in Paraguay. So one of the questions we may ask is how to attack corruption. A few thoughts on that before I finish. This requires active citizen participation. And for that is key the word transparency. This is not to be done only by the government. This is to be done by the media, by the press, by the citizens in every country. And in order to allow transparency, we need to provide information to the people for them to analyze. And in order to provide information, we need to make use of technology. And I don't want to explain all the things that we were doing, but Minister Lea Jimenez will talk about all the efforts that Paraguay was doing in order to increase transparency with the use of technology. This is the work of all citizens. And I remember my grandma when she was saying that we have to let the sunlight to get into the room in order to kill the disease. Corruption is a disease. We have to allow the sunlight, transparency, to come into the room in order to fight this particular disease too. Now, what Paraguay has done, Minister Leah will talk about that. So I'm going to focus only to finish it up about what the central bank has been doing. Of the many measures we were taking, there is a law right now where you can go on the web and you can check what is Leah Jimenez's salary each month or Carlos Fernandez's salary each month. The per diem we're receiving, the amount of travel we are doing every month, and so on. We started at the central bank to publish all our salaries, all the income that we're receiving in different sources, on the internet, even before the law was passed in Congress. So that was important. Was important even though I cannot request more salaries right now from Leah, saying that my salary is too little because twice the amount that she is receiving, by the way. We have also joined what is called the Unified Portal for Public Information. It's a unified portal where any citizen could go. Leah will explain after how you use that. And you can request any information that is not related only to public wages. It's related to other questions you may have about regarding what every government agency is doing. You can go there and request, and there is a limit on the amount of time after which you have to answer that. Otherwise, you can have problems. We have also joined what is called the Anti-Corruption Portal. It's a place where anonymously you can go and complain about potential acts of corruption. It's very good, and you can follow up. What are the measures being taken on that? We joined that portal. We were probably the first one who started a government hiring merit process. So it's not that you can go just to the central bank, talk to your neighborhood who is a strong politician. No, you have to pass very stringent tests. Well, similar probably to the one that we passed in Chicago Lay University. It's really difficult over there, and it's very transparent. By the way, I remember the last request for information was regarding how we hired 2 people recently, and we show all the information, all the test number, of course, anonymous in order to preserve the identity of the people who enter at the end, because that is not public information. And then no more requests, because they saw that was transparent. This is the amount of the psychological test, the amount of the technical test, the amount of English, and so on. And finally, I'm coming back to the issue that we are now discussing today. We joined the NSP, that is the public office in charge of all the public procurement, in order to transparent all the public purchases that we're having. We have our own, in our own internet and our own web, we have all the information regarding all the things that we are buying, all the process step by step, all the addendas, all the information, all the complaints, etc., etc. And finally, of course, the one that is being granted at the end of the day. So, competitive, transparent procurement process are quite important for all the countries in order to increase the transparency of the public world and, of course, to fight corruption. So this is quite a time for us to put more focus on that. As we always say, macro institutions are important, but then the micro institutions are also important in order for our societies to become the societies we want in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Fernandez. That was really terrific. Minister, it sounds like you need to ask for a raise.
Yes, I'm thinking, how can you tell everyone?
So let's jump right in, Minister. From your perspective as Finance Minister, what is the transparency agenda of Paraguay, and how does open contracting fit into that agenda? Where do you feel like you've made progress, and where do you think the most significant challenges are going forward?
Thank you so much. It is funny that you start with that question, because I was just thinking about the whole process that we have to undergo to get where we are today. And where we are today, we realize what is the transparency agenda. We have done so much, but let me tell you where we are. Carlos talked about consumption is macro critical. He stated that, I believe it was Christine Lagarde who said that at some point. And we can say that transparency is macro critical, right? When we talk about fiscal policy, we often talk about the fiscal responsibility law. We talk about also the monetary policy, when we think about the economy. But a very innovative way to improve management of public finances and the fiscal stance of a country is looking into transparency. How can we make a country that for all our history was run in darkness, right? Open to the society. And this is where we were in 2013. But let me take you back where we started so you can understand what kind of road we have been walking. In 2003, we implemented the transparent system of public procurement. But it wasn't as transparent as we wanted to be. It was a starting point, and we established the Public Procurement Office that oversees all the purchases of the government. In 2012, many years later, 9 years later, we joined the Open Government Partnership. And this was a first, proactive step towards, understanding that transparency was crucial for the country. Information technology and the participation of citizens was crucial. There was an outcry in the country for more transparency. People wanted to do more. This was an initiative that started on the side of the civil society, and it was brewing over a period of about 10 years. And finally, after the election of 2013, it became a true reality. It materialized into actual laws that had a true impact on how we manage the public resources. But in 2013, it was an election year, and the slogan of the current president was "Lo público en público." And when he talked about that at that time, we said, "Oh, nice slogan, Will he do anything about it? No, it's just political slogan to gain voters, right? Lo público en público means public matters in the public eyes. And but when he came into office, he actually started implementing these changes. He started working in the law, and the law was approved a couple of years later in 2014, a year later in 2014. But the reality was that apart from the demand from the society, which is crucial, there was also a need on the public sector side to approve such law. Why so? We were in a situation where we said, we know we have extremely low taxes, almost a tax heaven type of country. We were. But at the same time, we could not ask the contributors to pay more taxes when the government was run in the darkness. And therefore, for us, there was a real need to change the way in which we work and to demonstrate, to start building that social fabric, if you will, and to demonstrate to the people, look, this is what we're doing with your money. We are spending it well. We have to demonstrate that. And therefore, eventually, once you get to know us and once you see what is inside and once we change the way we do things, then we can perhaps start asking you for more, right? For larger contributions. So it was sort of a chicken and the egg type of thing. So we started working on that relationship. It's truly a relationship with the society. it completely changed the country culturally, right? And at the start, we sort of did things like, well, what about we do this, and what about now we do that? And so we started implementing many things. At some point, we realized we have so many tools. We have the tools that Carlos mentioned. You can now report corruption, you can see the salaries, you can see absolutely everything that is happening in the public sector. Any Paraguayan citizen can request the government any memo, any email, anything that is done by public workers can be requested by the public, and we have to provide that information to them, right? And we have a certain period of time to give that information. And if we don't comply to that, let me tell you, everyone finds out about that. And therefore, this really completely changes the way we do things. But just having the tools, where we are today, we have the law. It took some time. It took some political will. It took some demand from the society, and it took some need also from the fiscal policy side, right? It was a combination of factors. We have the laws, we have the tools, and what is happening? Many things have happened. First, we were worried that we have all these things and people were not using the tools, so we started working with USAID support and an NGO to be able to promote these new tools so that people understand, yes, you can report corruption. It's okay to report corruption. It's anonymous. You can use this information. And even today, people say, where is such and such information? It's online. It's provided to you online. But it's a learning process. And therefore, we have to work also on generating the demand for this information, right? Even though people wanted to know, they didn't know how exactly to use it. And it might seem, how is it possible, right? I am a researcher. I always long for having all information available. And therefore, I understand it. But for the person that does not do this type of work, what do I do with this? So it's a learning process. What we have seen over the last 4 years was truly transformational. And sometimes we went from complete darkness to complete openness. It could be shocking. Right? It could be quite shocking. It changed the way in which the public worker starts thinking about his or her own job. But it changed also from the fiscal side. It had a tremendous impact because now the public could see where all the fat was, right? The budget fat. And when people can see the budget fat, it's sort of like you're naked in front of people and you have to start, doing something about it. You have to cut the fat from the budget. And we started to undertaking that process. It was a fantastic process, if you tell me. We were extremely happy because as policymakers who don't want to rob the government, who don't want to do any type of corruption, who want to do the right thing, this is a fantastic tool and the best ally you can possibly have to put forward new policies, reform, changes, right? Budget cuts. Budget cuts before were almost impossible because nobody knew about it. You cut some sort of benefit or spending that was not appropriate, and that person will come right to you and will tell you, hey, what's happening, right? So it would be very difficult to implement. The person or the group or the ministry or whatever, right? At this point, we say, well, listen, the public, they don't want us to spend it this way. They don't want us. So it's them. It's not me. I want to give you everything, but it's them. It's the civil society demanding higher efficiency from us, and we have to respond to that. In that regard, this is truly has had a huge impact. Has meant that even as Paraguay faced a tremendous shock from the fall of the commodity prices in 2013, 14, 15, there was a huge decline in terms of government revenues, but we were able to do even more than we were doing before with the same amount of resources, which has been extraordinary. And how did we do that? We did that because we became more efficient, we cut the fat, we redirected resources to the areas that are priority areas for the country, in particular social programs, investment in infrastructure. So we have been able to implement these changes very gradually, but very surely. And this has meant that we have doubled, for example, the coverage of social programs in a very short period of time. In 4 years, the growth of Tecopora, which is a conditional cash transfer which provides a safety net for the vulnerable, have increased by 200%. And the size of it in 250%. That means we provide larger benefits to double the number of beneficiaries. The same has happened with regards to the non-contributory pension for the elderly that are in situations that are poor, right? And therefore, in general, we say we have done so much, it has represented so much. It has truly changed the rules of the game. With regards to public procurement, having the open contracting implemented starting in 2012 has meant tremendous changes in terms of how we buy public goods, how we procure the government. And I'll give you some numbers just because they are quite amazing. Number one, we have a public procurement portal, and the number of visits of people between 2015 1 year increased by 32%, which means we went from 2.5 million people interacting with that interface to 3.4 million people. This is huge for a country that has less than 7 million people. This is very important because that means people are looking at this information, and that means whoever is running the system knows that the people are engaging and know what we are doing with the resources and how we're spending them. We also have the gap between the reference prices and the actual prices that we get declined significantly by 90% between 2014, which was the year of the implementation, and 2017. So in terms of dollars, that meant that in 2014 we were spending about $230 million. The gap was $230 million. Today is $27 million. So that's, again, significant savings, and that's a very large savings for a country like relatively small size like Paraguay. We also have a decline in terms of the contract adjustment and amendments, which might think it's not a big deal, but it's actually an indicator that people are being more careful about the bidding processes and about what exactly is written there in those contracts, and they are not changing things to fit the needs, right? They are, before changing, you will think today you will think many times because everyone will find out that you have changed the bidding process. And therefore, it has been truly transformational. Looking forward, we are thinking that even though we have advanced so much and it has meant so much, we would like this process to be more orderly. What that means, we want to think about what is the agenda, what is the second generation transparency agenda, and what are we going to do so that this process continue permeating into the economy.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Minister.
Thank you.
George, the Minister mentioned that it's one thing to create transparency tools. It's another to get people to actually use them, and that's when the real kind of transformational effect, as you described it, comes about. In your work with the Open Contracting Partnership, there is a similar emphasis not just on making procurement data available, but making it accessible, making it usable. From that perspective, can you, and you bring kind of, I think, a comparative perspective to this as well, having looked at these issues in a number of countries. How do you assess the Paraguayan experience? Tell us about what it looks like, and what can other countries potentially learn from what they've been able to do?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Minister Jimenez. I think this was a very impressive sort of display of work, and we would love to claim that this is because we helped you do that. But all the contrary, I think you actually went ahead before the Open Contracting Data Standard, which is sort of the data that explains how to publish that data across the public procurement process, was even officially recognized as a standard. So you've been really a trailblazer in this regard, and we've learned a lot from your implementation, and we work with a lot of people. Some of our tech people are actually from Paraguay just because of that. I think, your question is key, Michael, in saying, like, open contracting is not only about publishing the open data and putting it out there, but really finding ways of engaging with citizens and engaging with business in how to use this data. This is what open contracting is about. It's about open data and connecting it to the engagement and using it to analyze. I think, one of the things when you go on the procurement portal from the procurement agency, you have really great visualizations that, visually may show you that, earlier, I think the first rounds of public information that was made public, it clearly showed that there was a tendency to submit a lot of the bids with very short bid timeframes towards the end of the year, which is a big corruption risk. This has changed if you then look, and you can go back and look at the data now because it's all still online. So you look at 2015, you look at 2014, and then you look at 2016 and 2017, how it's slowly evening out, which I think is some of the very interesting ways of also how open contracting has internally improved processes and others. I think public procurement matters really because it's one of the number one corruption risks in government for what Mr. Fernandez really was explaining so well earlier on, because there's so much discretion involved. One of the other examples, but it's also super important because, as you mentioned, it affects social policies. And there are some other examples in Latin America that have been moving forward in open contracting. In Bogota, we've seen open contracting being applied to school lunches, delivering school lunches. So 800,000 school lunches every day, and increasing through that process, not only identifying a price-fixing scandal that really was trying to increase costs of those school lunches for kids by 50%, but also increasing the participation of business from 12 to 55 suppliers, which I think is a huge progress. And I think where we see, it's not only about transparency, it also makes business sense. To implement open contract, to implement more transparent procurement processes. One of the things that surprises me always is a little bit how the story really has come about and what impact it has when it comes to corruption. So if you look at sort of the water that we have here, one of the contracts that were discovered by citizens was about a catering contract for sort of events in the Ministry of Education. So they've looked at it and said, well, why is the water bottle costing $1.17, which is 6 times as much as in a supermarket, in a Paraguayan supermarket? Or why is the mate, which is sort of the very classic sort of tea in Paraguay and the Southern Cone, why does it cost $14? Sort of these basic questions that are very relatable to citizens were able to then trigger really a lot of an uncovering of I was talking to Santiago Jure, who was the director of the procurement agency. He was saying, when we published open data, we were expecting sort of a storm that would come. But actually what we got was a hurricane. So it really showed that there was an impact. Before coming sort of to the learnings from your example, there's always challenges. So introducing more transparency, introducing open data doesn't automatically translate into less corruption. There's a lot of work that needs to happen into educating the different actors in how to use that information to improve policies, to establish better laws and regulations, as happened in Paraguay with introducing price bands to better regulate the cost of products that are purchased, and also to connect the dots between the different information that is published. One of the benefits of open contracting is it allows you to introduce unique identifier for processes and start connecting the budget data towards the spending data and really the payments of each of any of the contracts. And one of the trailblazing activities, which you're very modest about, is actually that you've published all the payments information related to all the contracts in the country just last week. I don't think there's been official launch yet, but it's already online. So I think this just shows how important it is to start connecting the dots and open up the full process to, in the end, and I liked your conversation about actually showing, what are we doing with your taxes and how much this relates. So I think this is a really important discussion because it's this relationship that is being started to build up. So, and then, the other question that goes back to your question is really publishing open data doesn't automatically generate users. There has to be a lot of learning involved, a lot of workshops, a lot of trainings, a lot of outreach to civil society, to journalists, and to business associations to show them how to use the data. So let me share with you 7 learnings that we can sort of extract from this example and from other examples in the region. I think one of the key questions is, Paraguay had an e-procurement system for 10 years before opening up it through open data. And, that's a very important step for many countries. But the change really came when the data was made as open data, when it was really easily usable, easily be translatable and reusable into visualizations, into analytics tools. So the question of opening up data and publishing open data is crucial here and much more important than one sometimes thinks. Connected data, so using this data then to link it up to other data, budget, but also corporate registers, or, for example, salaries of public officials or asset declarations of public officials is another key learning. So you need this open data to do this, and I think we've seen the first steps there, and I think there is a huge potential in the region to do more of this. The focus on the user, internal and external. So there's an internal use case for improving efficiency that you've mentioned, such as internal learning and introducing price bands and introducing regulations that increase this internal efficiency, but also externally to really, that's sort of the fourth learning, to really seek the dialogue with civil society and to show them how this is done. So that public officials know is that, when something is public, citizens will use it. In Peru, there's been a great study by Columbia University where monitoring public works, and so they've looked at municipalities where public officials knew that they were being monitored and public officials that were not monitored. And that led to a spending of 50% less. So just knowing this really makes them be much more aware of how do I set costs. And the role of empowering journalists. Journalists have a very special role in overseeing these processes. Finding a positive way of working with them. Again, previously, the Public Procurement Agency received direct requests for Excel tables and very specific requests that they would then provide back to the journalists. Now journalists go in there and basically surprise the Public Procurement Agency, which they're fine with, even though they have to deal with it. So this role of empowering journalists and data journalists in specific, given sometimes the very delicate role situation of journalists in the region is crucial, providing them the space to write about this. And I think, you mentioned the Open Government Partnership National Action Plan. And when we talk to some of your staff in the procurement agency, it really helped to have a public commitment that provided the backbone for those reforms to say, well, internationally, this is what we committed to. This is what we're going to do, and this is why we have to implement those reforms. It helps the reformers in those agencies to really move forward and refer back to it. So, while often it seems that, it's just a lip service or it's just an action plan, I think the Open Government Partnership Action Plan in Paraguay has been very successful. And finally, I think a learning is also if you are successful, there are powerful forces that will push back. It's not an easy process. We've seen it in Bogota. They've had half a year of fighting against political interests that were pushing back against those regulations, saying no, we don't want this open process. We want our status quo. So in the end, and corruption too often now, we know this now, starts at the top. So if you open up your data and you don't hear anything, you've done something wrong, basically. You haven't done enough to make sure that people know about this information. If there's no scandals coming out, and you should expect this and prepare for this. So I think Latin America now has really an opportunity. At the Summit of the Americas, we had a consensus that corruption is a crucial issue that hinders the development of the region. We had a consensus with some strong arguments around introducing measures in public procurement, including technology and open data. And we have great examples like Paraguay that really show us how these things can be done. So yeah, we're very excited about Latin America in this regard, and I hope that we can continue to use your example to show and present this case to the region.
Terrific. Thanks, George. Just before opening it up, Minister, you mentioned the second generation agenda on transparency for your country. Can you tell us a little bit about what hasn't gone as well as you would have hoped so far? What do you think are the next steps that you're most focused on? And to George's point, where have you felt the backlash? Where is there resistance, and what have you done to be able to overcome some of those actors?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, and I'm glad you mentioned the hurricane. I think you understated that. It was more like a revolution, really. And because it's exactly what you just mentioned. We, by changing the rules of the game, you are moving the ground of the status quo. You are changing your relationship with very powerful groups in the country. This happened in Paraguay, it happened everywhere. By putting light into these contracts, by putting light into all the interactions, you start moving things that some people didn't want to move, right? It brings to my memory the cases that when people started finding out the type of salaries that some public workers were getting, we starting to increase the number of divorces in Paraguay. Some families didn't know what their spouses were earning. And it truly brought some, it has spillovers at the very micro level, which is funny, but it's a reality. When we think about the reaction of groups that benefit from obscurity, right? There are people who were having contracts, were amending contracts, were changing them, were making them to fit their, their offer and all these things, and that was the way they interacted with the public sector. That is the status quo. You change that, they are thinking, what do I do now? Now I have to compete. Now I have to play with larger. Another thing that this brought is now we have buyers, even international buyers who want to come and enter bidding process from the public sector, because now they have greater trust in the public sector. But that means now the local, either construction companies or the local producers or providers or suppliers have now a greater deal of competition. And of course, I'm extremely happy when I hear that. But if you are one of those providers, you'll think, I don't like it so much, right? And even some public workers are not very appreciative of the situation. And it takes some time to get the grasp of how exactly do I work now that everyone is looking at me. So I think some pending tasks are, we have to truly understand, we as a government, but we as a society, understand that this should be a tool for changing for the better, for constructing a better society, to use it the right way. We have to teach the media how to utilize it, how to use this information properly, how to avoid misusing it. And it's bringing to my mind, I take the opportunity to mention that today we have a publication on the Ministry of Finance, myself, right? And the publication goes somewhere like over the last 6 months, the Ministry of Finance, managed by Mrs. Lea Jimenez, has spent 3,000, I don't know, so much, million guaraníes, which is like a huge amount of money. And I say, how much is that in dollars? Because I really have a hard time thinking in guaraníes. It's just so many zeros. And it's $500,000.
Should go to Venezuela.
And I thought, yes. $500,000. I said, come on, $500,000, 6 months of, we really are underdoing our consulting, because this consulting is basically to, we are bringing people that are helping to build the fiscal policy, improve the way we work, But for the common person, you see all those numbers and 3,200 millions, it just seems like, oh my gosh, they are misusing the funds. So we need to find a way to manage this wave of information, and we need to find a way for us to interact more proactively with the media and with the civil society, so that they actually know how to take this information, how to manage this flow, and what to take of it, right? And therefore, we have to continue on that process, a learning process for all of us, right? How do we communicate? And how do we use this information in the proper way for constructing a healthier country, a healthier relationship between the public and the private sector, right? And when I think about the next steps, it's not necessarily what went wrong, it's rather what we can do better, or how can we deepen this process, right? And there is a lot of space for improvement. I would love to learn, for example, about the program that is being implemented in Colombia for tracking the contracts for providing food for students, etc. So it's sort of we are starting to look from the very macro. Macro stability was nice. Now we need transparency because we want to look into how every single guarani is being spent and if it can be spent better or not. And therefore, we have to think about, when I say in a more organized fashion, I think we have the central bank, very transparent. We have Hacienda, it's extremely transparent. And I say extremely. But then it has to permeate to all the public institutions, right? We have to be more sort of standardized in the ways we approach this transparency. It's not just these two pillars of the economy. It has to be every single pillar of the public sector has to work with the same micro level transparency so that the whole thing starts to make more sense. And this is where we have to focus on now. We have to continue spreading this, and I think it has also it's also spreading in the private sector, right? It's not just a public, as Carlos said. This is corruption. Is not just a public sector thing. It's a PPP,
Right, George. For your list of lessons learned from Paraguay, financial transparency is important in marriages too, apparently. We've got a few minutes left. Let's take maybe one round of questions from the audience, and we'll come back to our speakers. Please introduce yourself. And
my name is Hamilton Cruz. We've come a long way in Latin America, but there is a frontier common to many countries in Latin America and other regions, which is SOEs. SOEs, they cherry pick their market of their government sometimes. Is there any good story from your side that involve SOE, and what's the story behind the story? The push came from the government, from shareholders, or the competitors? And if the Madam Minister want to comment on this, like Electro-Peru and other companies in Paraguay, if they are involved in this transparency agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Robert Thomas, a journalist for MLEX. And my question is, has your system been used in the courts? Have prosecutors made use of information they've divined to bring cases forward?
And over here. Any others? Sure.
I'm Sarah Shoquist from Washington College of Law. I'm here on behalf of Nancy Boswell, former director of Transparency International. We were looking at the Summit of America's commitment and the commitment to training, and I know we talked about capacity building among private sector civil society, but also of the government to use these tools. Who's coordinating action on that commitment? And what is the state's view on its role? Are there resources or programs that are being offered in the schools, and how young are you starting? Any countries that you're looking to model after? If anybody wants information, I have to put a plug in for our summer program. Deadline is the end of the month. So let me know if you're interested. Thanks.
Great. George, you want to take the first shot?
Yeah, I think state-owned enterprises is clearly one of the big dark horses in a way. And I think, it's been one of the issues that's been raised a lot this year in the G20. And I think we hope to push the same amount of transparency throughout there as well. There are very few examples so far. One of the interesting projects that we're seeing is in Mexico, the building of the new international airport, which is in a way a state-run conglomerate that sort of like builds the airport. And they have introduced open contracting data to publish all the contracts they've been doing. And interestingly, there's been a lot of coverage by journalists about the progress or the lack of, the kind of distribution that the contracts have been receiving. So this is definitely an area where there's a lot of focus because just the money involved is often so big. There are some areas, or it's like some approach that we've received from telecoms companies in Argentina, the state-owned run, and others. But there's more that we need. There's some experience in Ukraine around those as well, but in Latin America, there's still very little. And I think the other question was more directed towards you.
Sure. I don't recall exactly your question. I think you asked about
State-owned enterprises.
¿Qué exactamente? ¿Qué pregunta?
Others?
Yeah. We do have state. Yes, I see your point. We do have state-owned enterprises. The open access to information applies to all to the whole public sector. So they are also subject to the same law. We have a spillover that has been positive is the fact that we are now implementing the corporate governance in the public enterprises, which is key. We are just taking baby steps in that regard, but this is an important step. But of course, we have improved the functioning of public enterprises, perhaps as a result of that, perhaps as a result of other factors changing the way we view these companies. But nevertheless, I have to say they are a huge challenge still. Even in spite of transparency, etc., there are much bigger structural challenges inside that cannot be resolved only with transparency in the case of public enterprises.
No, one thing to complement, because I think it's very interesting, is the case of the binational. The binational we are sharing with Brazil. We are the one publishing all the wages and salaries. The Brazilians didn't want to do that, and they're not doing that. So, exactly, but they hate. But they hate that because in Brazil, they could see, how much money they were doing over there, because you have to have similar salaries. But it's quite interesting how we went ahead of Brazil, publishing all the information regarding this binational.
Yeah. And I want to take the opportunity of what George mentioned about the PPPs, and we have also implemented the PPP law, the key in hand law, very recently, 2014. And this also completely changes the way in which you work with the private sector. But at the same time, there is a very steep learning curve, right? Nobody wake up and say, I know how to run the PPPs, we know how to implement them. It's really a very steep learning curve. And having transparency along with the PPPs has been very good, but at the same time extremely challenging, because we are being watched. And even as some of the mistakes might not be related necessarily to corruption, but rather related to the learning process, this has resulted, for example, in not having approved a very crucial project, very large project, where there was perhaps a very small mistake being done. But these are difficulties that we have to overcome, which are good, looking forward, but not in that specific moment when you stop the process of a specific PPP. And then I remember someone asking a question. I think he left already, but the question was about the judicial system, I believe. Please, you. And whether we are using the information. We could do more, but it definitely is being used now. I just mentioned a few things that have happened. We have the historic elimination of judicial immunity of a senator that has never, ever taken place before. And this was because we have access to quite a bit of information and reporting, and, it was a huge scandal, very recent scandal, case of corruption. So he was removed and his immunity was taken away from him. We also have the destitution of the chief of the police department, the police. And this was something that was unthinkable in the past. It would have never happened before. These were people that were considered untouchables. And finally, the scheme or stealing gasoline was discovered because of tracking how was the use of gasoline. This person is in jail, and from that point on, we started implementing the card to control the use of gasoline. We have been very successful at implementing this card in the executive branch of the government. We are not yet successful in implementing the same card in the other two partners, right? The judicial system and Congress.
I heard you right. Somebody went to jail because
yes,
they discovered the abuse was discovered in the system.
That's right.
And somebody went to jail.
Yes, yes. Yeah, the chief of police. We also have the removal, and they are currently being prosecuted. They are not in jail. They were in and out, and they were out. But they're still being investigated. The chancellor and 4 deans of the National University, and a bunch of other people that were very close to them. This was a huge corruption scandal at the very start of the implementation of the transparency and all this wave, and the awakening of students from the public universities who started demanding better education, better spending of the public resources. There is some progress there, but there is a lot of progress needed to be where we want to be. Yeah.
And I think the final question was about capacity building and
capacity building
to some of the Americas.
Within the public sector. Yes, sorry. Yeah, please.
Yeah, on the commitment with the Summit of Americas, there's the developing a culture of citizen participation, prevention of corruption through teaching, learning programs.
Yes.
All levels of education, as well as ongoing education programs. And we were wondering what resources were being allocated to that and who's heading up coordination action on that commitment. Okay. What is your state's view and role?
Okay, fantastic. From the point of view of coordination within the government, the Ministry of Finance, a series of the Ministry of Finance, the SENAC, which is the Secretary of Anti-Corruption Secretary, the Planning Secretariat, we are all working together to push forward this agenda. We have a special team that is the anti-corruption team, which brings together more ministries to work on this agenda and to implement this agenda within the public sector. With regards to building capacity and with regards to students, I think we can do more there. Nevertheless, there are 2 things that we are doing. Number one, we are linking this also with the financial inclusion strategy. The financial inclusion strategy is one of the pillars of it is financial education. And we are bringing that into the schools. It's now being part of the schools program and is related to access to information and access to private and public information in this case. And with regards to going actually to schools and teaching students how to use this data, I think we can do more there. We have to do much more there to be more in a standard fashion approach, bring this agenda to schools, I think will be key in order to answer to the current challenge that we have, that is what exactly to do with this all this information. There is so much, it's a huge wealth of information, but it's not currently being used as much as we would like it to be. So that's the next step, and it's a crucial step. We are also working on that constantly, but it's a very small part. We have to do more on that. We definitely have to move more on that because it's still bothersome for, I get regular complaints from people in Hacienda, and I'm sure it's the same in all ministries that say, I have to provide all this information. Yes, it is the law. We have to do it. Thank you.
Terrific. Minister, thanks so much for joining us. George, this has been great. Mr. Fernandez, thanks for joining us as well. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in thanking our panelists.